remember Bobby McFerrin's song, Don't Worry, Be Happy? Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. Don't worry, be happy. In every life, we have some trouble, but when you worry, you make it double. Don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, be happy now. This song came out when I was 16, and I know this because a friend and I were singing at the top of our lungs when I was a new driver in the car, and I had my first minor fender bender. I can assure you that the lyrics did not comfort me in that moment. Worry touches all of our lives, doesn't it? From small things to very large things. Whether it's about health issues or relationships or finances or family dynamics or the future or the state of the world, the state of our nation, the upcoming election, fill in the blank. Worry is a part of the human condition, and no one is exempt. Worry can stop us in our tracks and be debilitating and paralyzing sometimes, keeping us stuck in a loop of anxiety and fear. I've noticed in my own life that the more attention and energy I spend worrying about something, a situation, or about someone for what they're going through, someone I love, the more anxious I actually become. Maybe you've felt that way too. When the burden of what might happen, the fear of the unknown, the scariness of what's to come can really weigh us down. So what is worry? Worry at its core is a response, a natural response to the unknown. It's our mind's way of trying to control what is out of our control. And we think we have so much control, don't we? Now, this doesn't mean that worry is all bad when we talk about worry. Worrying can be good in some situations because it can motivate us to action and help us prepare. I work with our students, and there's a lot of worry and stress right now as they start the new school year, some moving into new grades. And it's important to remember, I think, and I've shared with them, it's okay to worry because it does help us motivate to prepare. If they're studying for a test and they're prepared, the test worry might be lightened. If they don't study and worry about the test, it might actually be harder for them. Worry, I think, pretends to be helpful in our lives, and it's an anchor that we so often land on, but in reality, it is not helpful at all. Did you know that research suggests that nearly 94% of the things that people worry about today never come true? 94%. But even still, worry has a way of weaving itself into our daily living like an unwelcome guest. And it not only steals our joy and our peace that I think we so long for in today's chaotic world, it also steals our trust in God. And that brings us to Fiducia, the second aspect of faith in our sermon series, Faith Unveiled. Last week, Pastor Mark preached about a census, and today, the Latin word fiducia means trust, in faith as trust. But it's not about trust in statements about God as we look at this as one of the four aspects of faith. Instead, it is about radically trusting in God. And there's a difference. Do you trust in God enough to begin to let go of some of the worries, the fears, and the anxieties that might be burdening you today? Do you trust in God's grace enough to help you surrender your will to God's will? This is the question of fiducia. It is an invitation to grow in trust in the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Jesus invites the original listeners on the Sermon on the Mount, which Yami read to us from the Gospel of Matthew, into a life of trusting, a life that depends on the places of a life that depends on and places our trust in God's provision. To let go of that tight grip of fear, of the unknown, as well as the need to control the outcomes, which I think is also a part of naturally being human. In the gospel reading, Jesus uses the natural world as evidence of God's care and protection. He invites us to remember that the birds of the air and the lilies of the field do not labor and do not worry, and yet God provides for them anyway. If God cares this much for creation, how much more does God care for each one of us? The problem with worry, as McFerrin says, is that the more we do it, the more it doubles. I think that is true. And it tries to take over in our lives where trust in God could and should and is the invitation to be the reign in our lives, where we trust God first. Who among you, by worrying, can add a single moment to your life? Jesus says, stop worrying about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself. Jesus understood that worry just doesn't stop in an instant. There's going to be worries tomorrow too. But Jesus calls us to exchange our worry, to move away from uncertainty and the anxiety and the doubt and the fear that it brings to a place of radical trust in God. And it is radical, I think. Have you ever tried to teach a child to swim or observed someone trying to teach a child to swim? As soon as the adult lets go of the child in the water, what do? They begin thrashing around and tensing up and really struggling. But what a new young swimmer does not know is if they stop fighting the water and kicking and wailing their arms, and they let go for fear of sinking, if they just relaxed for a moment, if they trusted the water, they wouldn't actually sink. They would float. One of the biggest hurdles for a swim instructor is to get a child to relax in the water. Any observer might hear on the water's edge them say something like this: "It's going to be okay. Relax. You're going to be okay. Trust me. You will float if you stop thrashing around. Trust me as I let go." The question for us as people of faith is, do we trust the buoyancy of God in our life in the same way we trust the buoyancy of the water to keep us afloat? Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 calls us to trust with all of our hearts, acknowledging that God's ways surpass our understanding. Fiducia in this context means placing complete confidence in God, in God's providence, not partially or conditionally, all of our trust. I'm always amazed when I have the opportunity to have a conversation with someone who is going through a difficult time, and after sharing their story, they say something like, "It's been really hard, and I really can't see the outcome right now. I have no idea how this is going to end up. But I trust it will all work out somehow." This is the kind of trust that we are invited into. It's not some blind, naive trust, but it is a deep, abiding trust in God and in God's will. This attitude toward life and faith, it's not about catchy song lyrics. Instead, it is spiritual work to be done over time, that moment by moment, day by day, month by month, leads us to a trust in God's divine providence to be cared for as the birds of the air are cared for. Fiducia faith is trusting in this buoyancy of God. It is trusting that when the waves of fear and doubt and uncertainty and challenge and worry come, which we know they will, that all shall be well, and you will float. In a moment, we are going to sing a song with those lyrics, which were birthed out of a time of extreme hardship. The reality is that this kind of abiding, complete trust, this radical trust, I think can be really, really hard. Trusting in God especially can be difficult during trials and uncertainties in our life. That's why it is spiritual work, and it does take our participation, doing our part to trust and to cultivate the trust muscle that I like to call it. Because a part of that work includes discerning when do we trust ourselves and when do we let go and trust God. Consider the times in your life where you have relied on your own instinct and intuition to make a decision. Probably a bunch of examples come to your mind. It's not a bad thing when we trust ourselves. We are a part of a culture that has taught us from a very young age to be self-reliant, to be independent, to make our own choices, and to make our own decisions. And God has given us wisdom and intelligence and judgment and the ability to make wise choices and decisions. But I wonder, can you think about a time in your life when trusting yourself replaced trust in God and in God's will? Consider how trusting yourself and trusting in God's providence are meant to go hand in hand. And when they are working in alignment in your life, you may feel like you're in the flow, like you're being held in the buoyancy of God's love. Or when they're working against each other, things might begin to feel chaotic and out of control. For so many of us, I think it is really hard, and it does not come naturally to live with this kind of trust in ourselves accompanied with trust in God at the same time in the flow. Because at some point in our lives, we learned that not everyone, not everything, not every situation can be trusted, right? There's been a fracture of trust somewhere. The world has given us experiences of times in our own lives when we've been hurt by someone or something, and so we come to distrust in trust. But our faith tells us that God is different, and that God is absolutely trustworthy. Fiducia trust in God's divine providence is a deep-seated confidence that God will work all things out for our good, as promised in the book of Romans, chapter 8, 28. And so here's the good news. Even though this type of trust may be hard to come by for you today, it's not a passive state of mind that comes naturally. It's actually an active choice, which means that each one of us can work to cultivate trust when it seems so far out of reach. It means surrendering worries and anxieties and fears to God over and over and over and over again, recognizing that God is both capable and willing to care for us in love. So how do we do this? How do we move from worry or anxiety to fear to trust in practical terms? A few things came to my mind. Start your day by dedicating it. Dedicate the day to God in prayer. Bring your worries before the Lord and let God help carry them. You are not alone. The daily practice can help shift your focus from the worries and the fears that can dominate to God's faithfulness. Return to the scriptures. Use a concordance or Google to find a verse that might speak to your condition, your fears of trusting God in the world, the anxieties that you're feeling. A verse I memorized years ago when I was going through a particularly difficult and hard time in my life is Psalm 34:4. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He dispelled all my fears. I held on to that one for a long time. Work the spiritual muscle of gratitude and notice where God is showing up. It is hard to trust God to provide for you if you don't see the ways God is already providing. We need to use our eyes of faith to notice, to pay attention, to be awakened to where God is moving around us in our world. Thanking God for past provision and current blessing can help reframe our perspective. And finally, do not carry the struggles and the worries and fears alone. Share your struggles with trusted friends or in a small group. Make time to attend the women's retreat or the men's retreat this fall. Make time to go to a women's First Thursday event, a men's Third Thursday event. Make time for a monthly commitment to a Circles of Trust group or a group spiritual direction, which are right now taking applicants for being involved. Plug in somewhere here where your faith can be strengthened and fortified in community. Take small steps, big steps, whatever it is that your soul is leading you to do to cultivate a faith that allows space to surrender the anxieties and relies wholeheartedly on the one who guides our path. I had seen a poem this week that I will close with that a friend shared by Khalil Gibran, and I'd like to share it with you in closing, that reminds me of God's loving embrace in the midst of the concerns that we may carry into the world with us. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled from the peaks and the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages. And in front of her, she sees an ocean so vast that to enter, there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear. Because that's where the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but becoming a part of the ocean. This week, no matter what it is that is concerning you, no matter what it is that is weighing heavy on your heart, do not be afraid to let the buoyancy of God's love hold you and carry you. And take that step if it's hard to trust in God's provision and providence, and if it's easy to be an encouragement to someone else who might be struggling. May it be so, in the name of the triune God of love. Amen.